Hey everyone, welcome to the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. My name is Hitzir.
I'm Isa.
This week, we are here to talk about some of the best TV shows of 2022 so far. We've already covered a ton of films. If you want to listen to our top 10 best films of 2022 so
Mhm.
far, listen to our past two episodes where, our first two-parter on Behold here, where we broke it down from number 10 to number 6 and then number 5 to number 1.
Oh yeah.
But here we are about to talk about not just the 10 best shows of 2022, but we're about to highlight specifically four best freshman shows,
Mm.
season ones, to have debuted in 2022. So we'll be talking about We Own This City,
Mhm.
Pachinko, Minx, and Irma Vep. Those are our highlights for the best new shows for 2022. Let's begin though with We Own This City on HBO.
Mm.
The Wire creator David Simon revisits Baltimore to investigate police corruption in his latest show, We Own the City. In my opinion, I think David Simon is the greatest storyteller of all time on TV.
Mm.
Primarily because his TV show is the greatest TV show of all time, or some would argue the greatest work of fiction in any medium of all time. That's The Wire, right?
Yes. Yes.
And his masterful shows have, I think, historically been underseen and undervalued, but his unblemished track record for creating some uncommonly insightful and sophisticated TV is quite undeniable.
Mhm.
He has a lot of roots in Baltimore. He spent 2 decades as a crime reporter for the Baltimore Sun,
Yep.
and then he spent like the next 5 years becoming a non-fiction author of books such as Homicide: A Year on a Killing Street and The Corner: A Year in the Life of an Inner City Neighborhood. And he has since parlayed that observational and journalistic skills into crafting a variety of extraordinary shows that sort of study alienated communities and the failing institutions that shape these fringe social
Mhm.
ecosystems. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm gonna wax lyrical about Simon for a while because he's so iconic,
Yeah.
in the TV medium, or and has my greatest respect as a screenwriter. And he first actually gained screenwriting experience working on a series adapted from his first book, and the series is obviously NBC's Homicide: Life on the Street,
Mhm.
which was a gritty cop show, following Baltimore detectives that served as a prototype for his forthcoming urban masterpiece. He then later adapted his second book into a mini series called The Corner, which chronicled the life of an impoverished family amid the open air drug markets of West Baltimore. Of course, Simon is most well known for his magnum opus, The Wire, the anti cop show, in his words, the quote unquote rebellion against all the horseshit police procedurals afflicting American television at the time, and still does,
Mm.
to be honest. And through 5 seasons, that novelistic series dissected the rot of America's faltering institutions, ranging from policing to labor to governance to the education system to the media. And most impressively, The Wire examined the macro through the micro, like the mundane and minutiae
Yeah.
of its human characters, detailing the unvarnished lives of everything from cops to criminals to blue collar workers to politicians to students to teachers to reporters in Baltimore, exploring the ordinary people whose lives have been defined by the legislative policies and political forces beyond their control. A lot of that plays into what we're about to talk about as well.
Yeah.
And this type of complex and challenging storytelling has found its way into the many shows Simon has created since. Him and Ed Burns headed overseas for the Iraq War miniseries Generation Kill,
Mhm.
and then him and Eric Overmeyer, also from the Wire writing staff, went down to New Orleans for Tremaine, this um, deep dive into the lives of jazz musicians, chefs, and more, struggling to make their way in the city's post Katrina years. And then he reteamed with his Baltimore Sun colleague, William F. Zorzi, to make Show Me a Hero, starring Oscar Isaac, which is the first show I've ever noticed him in.
Mhm.
A miniseries dramatizing the controversy over desegregated public housing in Yonkers.
Yeah.
Then him and George Pelecanos created The Deuce, which is another great show, a drama about the rise of the porn industry in the 1970s New York.
Mhm.
Most recently, though, Simon and Burns returned for The Plot Against America, which was an alternate history drama, quite a stretch for David Simon,
Yeah.
that wondered what if xenophobic populist Charles Lindbergh had become president and
Hmm.
turned America towards fascism in the 1940s. So he may have built his career around Baltimore, but he has spent the last 13 years examining a wide range of social political topics outside of Baltimore, from Iraq to New York to New Orleans.
Hmm.
But with his latest project, We Own the City brings the acclaimed TV author back to a subject near and dear to his heart. And he is clearly very knowledgeable about, given the background that I've just explained to you all.
Yeah.
He's talking about here crime and corruption in Baltimore. This is created by Simon and his frequent collaborator, George Pelecanos, who, as I've mentioned, was on The Wire, was on The Deuce, was on Generation Kill, was on The Plot Against America. So they're frequent collaborators. And in an interesting twist, this new miniseries is actually based on a non-fiction book by a different Baltimore Sun reporter called Justin Fenton.
Hmm.
He came to the Baltimore Sun after David Simon, but clearly they have that shared background, and Justin Fenton clearly trusted Simon to adapt this story into a work that wouldn't be too Hollywoodized, shall we say. And it is set in the aftermath of the protests over the killing of Freddie Gray, who died in police custody due to spinal cord injuries. A very famous BLM case, the first instance of the BLM protest, not the second George Floyd one.
Yeah.
And the series centers on the inner workings of a real life Baltimore Police Department. This is a real story that really happened, and the show depicted it accurately from all accounts. It follows the BPD's Gun Trace Task Force, the GTTF, who robbed and extorted citizens for years before a federal investigation uncovered their crimes. The GTTF was headed up by Sergeant Wayne Jenkins, who is played by John Bernthal, with swaggering bravado. And the story of Jenkins and his dirty colleagues, alongside the scandals surrounding them, is a complex one, and it's told here in great detail. But I think where a more conventional drama might hold your hand by taking you through the rise and fall of the GTTF chronologically, like
Hmm.
The Shield, for example, on FX, Simon instead puts you in the shoes of the investigators and the prosecutors who are forced to piece the evidence and events together through run sheets, through interviews, through police logs. Bentall's transformation from clean-shaven rookie to the bearded tyrant is the series' showiest portrayal, but we also follow many other compelling roles that help put, unusually for Simon, a non-linear timeline together.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think about the structure of We Own the City? Do you think Simon pulled it off without it being too confusing or too convoluted? And what do you think about We Own the City overall, especially as a sort of quasi sequel to The Wire?
Oh, let's talk about the timeline first, I guess.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Unusual and surprising from Simon. And I think like going into this, and given that this is the first time he's kind of like messing with the narrative in forward backward kind of motion,
Sure,
it took me a
yeah,
couple of episodes
yeah.
just to get used to that and kind of orientate myself with everything that's going on. I think
Mm,
by most accounts, there's enough kind of like clues for you for the audience to make out where they are in all of that. Like, we don't
yep.
have like title screens necessarily for each particular era that they're in. Those are used very sparingly and only if we require the background, right? So
Mm,
orientating wasn't as bad as I was worried it was going to be in the first episode. It's like, oh, okay, wait, where am I? What's going on?
yep,
By the
yep.
second episode, I think it's fairly clear. I think especially kudos to Bernthal, especially who a lot of the time underlines the scenes when we do any sort of time jump, forward or backward.
Mm,
What he wears, his uniform, the state of his facial hair,
yep.
gives us a very good idea of kind of like where we're situated within the story arcs in and of themselves. So I think despite my initial worry and confusion, that clarified itself very, very quickly. And I think largely it was
Yep.
very successful. And the
Mm,
ability to juxtapose kind of like present day and past does allow for some very interesting juxtapositions with like the thematic understandings uh, that Simon's trying to explore, right? Like for example,
Mm.
motivations or like things like the delusions of these officers, right? Then kind of like jumping back and forth, or
Yep.
where the kind of like origins of their temptations come from, right? With what they're
Mm.
saying in the present day as they are confronted with their crimes, really
Mm.
adds a lot of weight to that. And then if you are filled in later on with the details of those things, like you kind of like have these like checklists of where all of those are, and it makes it very compelling, in my opinion. And
Yep.
it fills it out in a way that continues to provide tension without necessarily like having us along for a linear kind of like narrative ride. So I did
Yes.
enjoy
Yeah.
that, and being that it's the first time Simon has done this in one of his works, uh, I
Mm.
I'm hoping that he, in the future, that he will consider doing it a bit more if it suits his needs, right? Because
Yeah.
I enjoyed it in a very kind of different way. Like The Wire is still right. His magnum opus is the most phenomenal thing that we've gotten on TV ever, and it makes me
Mm.
wonder that if for some seasons maybe The Wire could have even reached for kind of like further heights of storytelling if he had chosen to do something like that. What he's done with We Own
Mm.
This City. Um, so I'm curious if that could have worked out. But certainly for this series, it worked very well.
Yes. Okay. So the second part is the show itself. How aware were you of the GTTF, the Gun Trace Task Force, in real life? Did you ever read any of the headlines or the Vice documentary about them and stuff like that? And if you were aware, how did you think the show translated the real events to narrative fiction?
Hmm. While while it was going down, kind of, or while it was being reported in kind of real time, it
Yep.
was one of those things that kind of like graced my timeline on whatever social
Mm.
media platform I was on at the time. So I did kind of casually track that. It wasn't until I watched the Vice documentary that I kind of like took a bigger interest in that.
Mm.
But I do feel like the Vice documentary didn't necessarily provide as much context, I think, as We Own the City did, if that makes sense. The
Yes.
Vice documentary was very focused on the actual prosecution of these people and giving you a context to
Mm.
why they are being prosecuted and why it was such a landmark case, but not
Mm.
necessarily filling in kind of like, the blanks as to why. Like so much of my understanding of the way Baltimore works comes from The Wire, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
and for to watch the Vice documentary without uh, that kind of like background would have been more
Mm.
challenging. But We Own the City does it in such a way that it feels more complete and whole, right? Like clearly a wholly different function from the Vice documentary, but still
Yes.
it felt a more complete story and perhaps a more
Yes. Yeah.
um I don't know if humanizing is the right word necessarily, but it felt more whole and therefore a lot more nuanced than what Vice did for sure.
Yes. 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 I agree that David Simon has spoken a lot about how shocked he was about what happened with the Gun Trace Task Force because this wasn't the BPD that he left.
Yeah.
The stuff that he chronicled in Homicide and The Wire and The Corner and stuff like that was kids stuff compared to what the GTTF did,
Oh
and he
yeah.
was shocked that the BPD had devolved so much. Like, I mean, this wasn't a guy that held the BPD in any
Oh
esteem at
no,
all.
absolutely not.
He knew about the practices, the procedures, the inefficiency of the bureaucracy and the system and all of that. He laid it out very clearly the issues was. But
Yeah.
even David Simon was shocked about what happened with the GTTF, and the GTTF is just a symptom of a much larger problem. And
Hmm.
he goes on to talk about it has been 20 to 22 years since he last covered the policing in Baltimore,
Yeah.
either as a nonfiction writer or as a
Yeah.
journalist. So his theory is that the people that came to power in Baltimore police were the worst people that we saw in The Wire.
Hmm.
Your hooks and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
You know, um, they then perpetuated the culture. These Now we are 2 or 3 generations removed from the generation of police that Simon covered.
Mm-hmm.
And these 2 or 3 generations learned from the worst of the worst. And then, then it becomes even worse. The terrible officers who come to power teach even more terrible cadets who then come to power who teach even more terrible things. So it's a slippery slope. And it's gone down so far to the point where the GTTF behaved like the commissioner said, like 1930s gangsters,
Yeah.
right? And to your point about the humanism of the show, Simon is always about people. At the end of the day, they're not cogs in a machine. He examines the macro through the micro, as I
Mm-hmm.
said. And this is a large ensemble show. There are so many characters here to help you piece together what happened. There is Jamie Hector, who was Marlowe from The Wire, who plays against type
Mm-hmm.
to embody Sean Suter, who is a BPD homicide detective with a key perspective
Mm-hmm.
on the relationship between the department and the city it's serving.
Yeah.
We have Wunmi Masako from Lovecraft Country, who plays Nicole Steele, who is an attorney in the DOJ, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, investigating the culture of the VPD.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the most integral character to me because but others in We Own the City are proxies into individual parts of the
Yeah.
machinery. Some cops are building a racketeering case, some are securing a conviction, some are juicing arrest stats, some are leeching the city's budget via fraudulent overtime hours. But Steele is the one who is tasked with looking at the department from a bird's eye view. That view sharpens through her conversations with antagonistic cops, like BPD officer Daniel Herschel, top Baltimore brass, former police commissioner Kevin Davis, alongside several local artists or authors or activists, some of whom play themselves, by the way.
Yeah.
So it is through Nicole Steele that We Own the City is at its most explicit or at its most exposition-y, I guess, in identifying the cancerous elements of policing in America and Baltimore in general.
Mm.
There is impunity for offenders with badges, endless battles over budget, putting restrictions on officers without also strengthening the rights of citizens, and a sort of warlike approach to public safety, the militarization of the police, all become giant hurdles to institutional change.
Yeah.
And like all his shows, We Own the City, their broader ideas are grounded by meticulous attention to geographical specificity and
Mm.
authenticity. Simon and his writers don't shy away from immersing you into regional slang or accents and shop talk and the monotony of police work
Yeah.
and the overlapping circles of various crimes, cops, and agencies, and most of all, a dizzying array of supporting characters, plot lines, and intermingling threads. Simon almost approaches his cop shows like a fantasy author would approach a fictional fantasy land, like it's almost like you're learning an entirely new lexicon, the way that the police talk, the accents and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? So I really get engrossed in details such as that, and Simon does it very well. What about you? What were the elements of the show that either shocked you or impressed you?
Oh man. I think just just how casual, not maybe not casual, how natural it felt, right? For these characters, especially from kind of the onset, right? We follow Wayne Jenkins and he in his rookie days, or we have flashbacks to that. We don't see that much of it in particular,
Mm,
to see that kind of the slow but sure uh um degenerate he's slow but sure kind of degeneration into what he is at the end of the series itself, right?
yep,
Like again, a phenomenal performance by John Bernthal, but not
yep,
just him but the ones around him as well. Like it comes from these small compromises, right? They have the best of intentions sometimes, but
mm,
slowly accumulate to the point whereby decisions are made um that are shocking in their entirety, but at the same time
yeah,
understandable, right? Like it's very
mm,
hard to judge them when you have
mm,
like the full context of their stories being presented to you in such a way,
mm,
right? Because like who is to say that you in their shoes would not have done something similar?
Yep.
that is not to pardon or forgive what they have done, or the victims of what they have done, um,
Mm.
to make light of what the victims have gone through, certainly, but still, like, it is understandable, or at least the trajectory is clear enough, and that kind of like detailing the minutia of it,
Yeah.
right, and the
Yep.
attention to that detail is so impressive and so compelling, right? I think that what sticks out to me the most, and it's not just with Wayne Jenkins, even though we spend a lot of screen time with him, right? It's everybody else, whether it's G Money, whether
Herschel. Yeah.
Herschel or Suter. Like, at some
Mm.
point in time in the day-to-day grind of being a beat up on the streets, right, and kind of seeing all the things that unfold and the circumstances post Freddie Gray, it
Mm-hmm.
it seems understandable, right?
Yep.
It seems like, yeah, it slowly chips away at you and what you believe you stand for. Um, you know,
Mm.
so I love the fact that that is, consistent throughout the entire series. I love the fact that, it never lets up on that. That was definitely one of those things, and I think the pacing for me for this series felt really good, right? Like, there's
Mm.
no one point in time that I'm kind of like lost in, there's so much detail, there's so much minutia, there's so much kind of leaning into the regional specificity, but I'm never lost in any of those. Like, it doesn't confuse me. It's not there for the sake of being there necessarily, as much as it does add a richness to the world that I'm being immersed in. And that's a
Yep.
very tight balance to strike, right, in something that is this short, in terms of
Yep.
its runtime. So those two are the two aspects that pop out at me the most upon watching all of this.
Yes, yeah. Definitely, extrapolating just how broken Baltimore's law enforcement system is
Yes.
in itself a naughty and challenging endeavor. But We Own the City isn't simply interested in depicting the insidious facts. I think a lesser biopic, shall we say, or whatever, would have just
Yeah.
focused on the facts, a Wikipedia entry, shall we say.
Yeah.
But this is also focused on dramatizing, to your point, how the lack of systemic safeguards and accountability, the lack of repercussions,
Yeah.
will inevitably tempt those in power to abuse it.
Yeah.
It shows you the seductiveness, the ease, and most of all, the entitlement that it engenders in the police officers. It
Yeah.
is it's all depicted in the kind of typically unflashy, unstylized manner that Simon and company examine the moral collapse that befell Baltimore, and it's all catalyzed by policies, the policies of drug prohibition, the policies of mass arrests
Yeah.
that were championed by politicians higher up than the police commissioner or even the governor of Baltimore.
Hmm.
And these policies of mass arrests of drug prohibition were championed at the expense of actual police work.
Yeah.
I think Jenkins and GTTF are rightfully portrayed as the villains, yes, but We Own the City wisely kind of pinholes out from this singular case to show you how and why people in power are incentivized to commit these crimes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's the actual brilliance of We Own City,
Yeah.
and to be honest, the brilliance of most of Simon's work, lah, because it shows you why people do these things, and it all stems from kind of institutional failure from the top down.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What surprises me, and I think I noticed something this in Simon's work as well, that within his storytelling, right, there will always be at least, or most of the time, there's this one kind of key conversation that is pretty under the radar, right, that underscores, his kind of like personal understanding of why things happen, right, whether it's in The Wire, whether it's in the Deuce, and all of that, right? So, and for me, in We Own This City, it's this sit down, right, with Nicole Steele, and they talk about the war on drugs, right, and how that
Mm.
is the genesis of this problem, right, and
Yep.
how it's impossible for anyone to come up and say, look, we've lost this, right, we
Mm-hmm.
need to start from scratch again, we need to relook how we're going to go do this. No one is going to come and say that, and we do what we do with what we can, right,
Yeah.
and like that is so potent, right, to kind of fit that within the scope of everything else that is going on that we're trying to track and pay attention to as an audience. Just
Mm.
like a very quiet, very low key scene of that happening, but really just details like the causation, more or less, of
Yep.
like the situation that these characters find themselves in. And I love it when Simon does that, right? Because
Mm.
it's such a casual kind of like reference to that. It's like, look, if we weren't so caught up in all of this, we would see the reason. But the truth of the
Yep.
matter is that we can't divorce one from the other. And that
Mm.
just speaks to the brilliance, right, of his writing and his storytelling.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, of all the characters on We Own the City, Nicole Steele is actually the only fictional character that they made up. She is a
Hmm.
conglomeration of several actual DOJ civil rights prosecutors, lah, but
Yeah,
they kind of completed her into one character, and every show, Simon is known for no hand holding, but
yeah,
he actually does hold your hand sometimes because, but the key is that like it doesn't seem obvious. It seems very casual. It doesn't seem like exposition.
yeah,
And Nicole Steele, and the value of Nicole Steele is that she's able to explain the bird's eye view to you, like, as you just
yes.
mentioned.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. About the show. Yeah. I mean, any David Simon show is worth a watch, especially one where he returns to Baltimore here. So,
Mm.
that's why this is one of my favorite new shows of 2022. Any final thoughts before we move on?
Oh man, if you love The Wire, this is definitely worth a watch, right? Being able to watch like Wire alumni come back, right?
Mm.
And play against type, as in the case of Jamie Hector.
Ma-
It,
yeah, I
yeah.
almost said Malo, but yeah,
See, exactly, right? Like to be,
yeah,
it took me a moment. I was like, oh, okay, that's very different.
yeah.
But like just be able to see these guys come back, right? Like it's a phenomenal kind of performances, a
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal like medium of storytelling, or rather the his choices in the way to tell the story that Simon adopted
Mm.
here. Like it's new for him and it's fresh, because I mean I love Simon. After a while, like I know what to expect, and this kind of like caught me a bit of guard, and I loved it. Just for that, right? It wasn't any less good. It wasn't any less like it wasn't gimmicky, right? To that point. So highly encourage you if you're a big fan of Simon's work that this is certainly worth a watch. If you're
Mm.
interested in anything that went down in Baltimore during that period of time, this is illuminating in a lot of ways that perhaps other news articles or even the Vice documentary was not.
Mm,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. Agree wholeheartedly with that. We move on from HBO to a streaming service, Apple TV Plus,
Oh
which
yeah.
is 100% the streaming service of the year. This fucking streaming service
Hands
is
down.
killing it,
Hands
killing it.
down. It's
They're
so
like
insane.
putting up banger after banger after banger.
Yeah,
I mean, sorry to Netflix or Disney Plus, which like have more content.
for sure.
Amazon too,
Yeah,
but not as consistent content as Apple TV
for
Plus.
sure.
And right at the top of that list, alongside Severance, is Apple TV's adaptation of Min Jin Lee's historical fiction epic
Yeah.
Pachinko. Um, it is based on Min Jin Lee's historical fiction novel, and this is a beautiful series that chronicles the lives of an impoverished Korean family across 4 generations
Hmm.
as they leave their homeland in a quest to survive and perhaps thrive.
Yeah.
So it begins with the Japanese occupation of Korea in the early 1900s, and this era spanning story is told through the eyes of a remarkable matriarch named Sunja, who is played by Yoona Jeon as a child, by Min Ha Kim in
Mm.
young adulthood,
Mm.
and the Oscar-winning Yoon Yoo Jung as an elderly woman.
Yeah.
So three different actresses across three different eras of her life. And she is the matriarch who helps this family triumph against a multitude of hardship through the many, many decades.
Hmm.
Unlike the chronological structure of the book, the TV show presents the story non-linearly.
Hmm.
It juxtaposes Sunja's journey with that of her grandson, Solomon,
Yeah.
who is a successful businessman in the 1980s, who is faced with a dilemma. Does he sort of abandon his roots, or does he honor them at the expense of his career?
Yeah.
As adapted by Soo Hugh, who actually was the showrunner for season 1 of The Terror. So I have mad respect for Soo Hugh.
Hmm.
And it's also directed by Kogonada and Justin Chon. This series is a sweeping in its scope. It is gorgeous in its visual production, and yet intensely intimate in its ambitions.
Hmm.
Pachinko's immersion into the history and politics and different periods is certainly educational for audiences, but it only forms the backdrop for its finely calibrated multi generational family drama.
Yeah.
from its detailed observation of the clash between Korean and Japanese cultures to its rich focus on character work over plot machination. Pachinko is a sumptuous and lyrical and graceful observation of human perseverance and tenacity that will stir your soul. You might think it's not universal, but a story like this is definitely universal despite whatever setting it's in.
Mm.
Since Pachinko was, your number one pick, give me your thoughts about Pachinko and what made it great.
Oh man. Um it's it's hard to describe how striking it was to be watching Pachinko, right? Like I
Mm,
can't place my finger on the fact whether or not it was because it was beautifully shot, because the performances were spectacular, because the lines that were delivered with nuance and care and
mm,
subtlety in and the attention that they paid, right? Even in the subtitling to whether or not something was being spoken in Japanese or something was being spoken in Korean, right?
yep.
Like all of those like little things added up to what was for me an incredibly satisfying emotional experience. And I say
Mm,
satisfying in the way that, like, because of its non-linear storytelling, a little like what we own the city, right? Which
mm,
and as you have pointed out, diverges from the novel itself, right? It gives
yep.
this wonderful freedom for the showrunners to again juxtapose scenes that uh at first glance seem unnatural. Like it wouldn't be your first pick to juxtapose, right? Like they're not they're the scenes that the time jump allows them to do. It's not something that you would naturally think, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense at first glance. But upon watching these scenes in their sequence, right, and the way that they play against each other, form an incredible conversation. And I think that in and of itself, it is conversation that underpins the entirety of Pachinko, right? So much of its
Mm,
most powerful scenes are not necessarily conflict, are not necessarily action, but are these very well crafted scenes of conversation and dialogue between characters over multiple generations, and how
mm,
it becomes almost this mood piece, right? Without
yep.
losing any of the detail of these characters' lives and where they're situated at the point in time that we are shown. Um,
Mm,
on top of that, you give me an amazing score by Nico Moli that at no point in
mm,
time robs a scene of anything. It's always to underscore what's going on. It's always to add kind of the mood in there and the
yep.
fantastic costuming. And on top of that, like the color palette, like so many of these things are gorgeous and lush and full. Uh, and despite the fact that we know how things turn out, in the end, right,
Yeah.
the pacing allows for you to follow the story in such a way that there is a tension held
Mm,
while you are following these characters and slowly being invested in their story both forward and backward at the same time. So like
yep.
there's just so many things that work so well together, and to have all of these great things in the same pot and stirred in a way that presents something complete to you, right? That at the end of the series you're just like, okay, it still gives you a sense of hope while having
Mm,
explored all the various kind of like threads and tension points and resolve them in a way that may not necessarily give you like the complete picture, but just enough for it to hit home, and just enough for you to feel good, just enough for you to like kind of like get an understanding of this very long slice of one family's life within
mm,
history. But it isn't enough for you to walk away from watching that and say like, damn, okay, that was an experience and a story like may not necessarily be the most unique presentation of it, right? But
mm,
like so complete and so whole and wholesome is the best that I can reach for
mm,
at this point in time. Yeah, which is why like
yeah.
Pachinko is my top pick out of the four.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel like you nailed it. The pleasures and the depths of pachinko are very tactile. You feel
Yes.
like you can touch it and reach it. And another aspect of the show that I really, really liked, and of the book too, is that Japan's occupation of Korea, which lasted from the early 1900s to the end of World War
Hmm.
II, hasn't been chronicled much by Western arts.
Yeah.
or Japanese art for that matter. But even if this were well-trodden territory, I think Pachinko still covers the subject with such artistry and grace
Yeah.
that it will still feel special. This is a family saga that combines the denseness of prose fiction with visuals,
Yes.
with the specific advantage of television.
Mm-hmm.
The depiction of the Korean occupation or Japan's occupation of Korea is something that I've not seen lah, in mainstream media,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that in the same way that I appreciate, say, the depiction of the partition in Miss Marvel. They're very different
Mm.
shows, but
Yes.
you get what I mean, like,
Yes.
with the specialness of it.
Yeah.
And I think the first and foremost example of the I guess the leader, the thing that the show hangs on
Yes.
is Sunja, right? And the three actresses that play Sunja.
Mm-hmm.
We already know that Yoo Jung Yoon from Minari is like incredible, but
Yes.
this is actually the first screen acting role for Yoona Jeon and Min Ha Kim.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they hold the screen just as effortlessly as their Oscar-winning counterpart.
Yeah.
Their mannerisms are so perfectly in sync. Like I can see Sunjas in them all. When they
Mm.
smile or cry, like I can see the others in them, and that's great. The Min Ha Kim version though has very few reasons to smile and a lot of reasons to cry because she exists in, I think, the most emotionally and politically challenging phase of the story.
Yes.
She grows up in the relative tranquility of the boarding house her parents run in a
Mm-hmm.
rural village, and the teenage Sunja falls under the spell of a guy called Han Su, who is played by Lee Min Ho,
Yep.
who is a sharp and charismatic local official who has decided that the best way to survive the occupation is to collaborate with the Japanese and adopt as many trappings of their culture as he can, to the point where he becomes a quasi yakuza figure
Mm.
in organized crime. Later on, an incredibly powerful episode involving the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 offers more insights into how he wound up that way.
Yeah.
What makes the episode so great beyond its visuals, beyond the story, again, another aspect of a history that has not been depicted a lot in Western media,
Yeah.
is that this entire episode was not in the book. And it
Mm.
offers so much context to Hansu, who was just probably the only one-dimensional character in the book,
Yeah.
just the villain.
Yeah.
But this gives you like a more appreciation for how he came to be that way.
Yeah.
The Hansu and Sunja affair grows incredibly messy, and it requires the intercession of a pastor called Isaac, a kind of a traveling Christian missionary who agrees to marry her to prevent shame from falling upon her family when she has a baby out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sunja sort of recedes a bit for the scenes that take place in the 1980s, which feature Solomon
Yes.
returning to Japan from his life in New York to help close a huge real estate deal and to search once again for his long missing stepsister,
Mm-hmm.
who disappeared a long time ago from his life. He and this Japanese colleague, I think a sort of love interest, which is again made up for the show, but I like her
I
also.
do. Yeah.
Um, they have this conversation about when they're in America, they like to the white people like to play the game, which Asian am I,
Yeah.
the guessing game.
Yeah.
And Korea is rarely a top guess. And I guess I can sympathize because Malay is not either.
Mm-hmm.
And Solomon just he just nods if anyone suggests he's Japanese. And over the course of the season, we see how he feels caught between the country he grew up in as an immigrant
Yeah.
and the one where he built his career, and the other country, the motherland, shall we say, the one that his grandmother tells him about, and those questions of cultural identity wrap satisfyingly around an examination of the go-go Japanese economy of the 1980s,
Yeah.
which feels kind of similar to the moments before and after the bursting housing bubble of the late 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond the themes and beyond the acting and everything, as we said, Pachinko is impressive on all levels. It is visually stunning. The knockout score you've already mentioned is gorgeous to look at in every era.
Yeah.
The lush greens of Sunja's pastoral childhood are just as vivid as the kind of cool metropolis blues of 1980s
Mm-hmm.
Japan.
Mm-hmm.
In Solomon's world. The earthquake story even like not only shifts its perspective to Hansu for an entire hour, but adopts a more raw and a more impressionistic style to
Yeah.
capture both the devastation of the events and its uglier aftermath, in which Japanese citizens. This is real. Used it as an excuse to murder Korean immigrants.
Mhm.
But even subtler devices like color coding the subtitles, like you said, to clarify
Mm.
when characters are speaking in Korean or Japanese, or sometimes both in one conversation, works wonders at making the story feel more immersive and more poignant.
Yes.
And I'll be remiss if I didn't point out, before I give it back to you, the dazzling opening sequence, which I never
Oh
skip.
my God. Yes.
Um, to Live for Today by the Grassroots. It's set in a pachinko parlor, and it features the great cast of pachinko dancing in the pachinko parlor. It's
Mhm.
almost weirdly similar to another very different show, Peacemaker, which also features a great dance sequence as its opening.
Yeah.
I just want every show now to have a dance sequence opening. Why not
Yeah.
get your cast to dance? That's great.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right? To have it in like this
Yeah.
brightly neon colored like pachinko parlor with them wearing their period clothes, like it's
Mm,
so good. It is so good. Always watch it, never skip it, right? And like I think that's
yeah.
important too because they do mix it up for several episodes, right? Like in the case
Yep.
where we're transitioning from one episode to the other and it ends on a cliffhanger, right? They don't
Mm-hmm.
bring back the dance scene until like much later on in the episode, or like they skip it
Mm,
entirely just to underpin where you are at in the story itself. Is
yep.
incredibly important, I think, when we are thinking about the platforms that we find shows like this on, which is streaming, right? Like it's so easy
Yep.
for us to go in the kind of like Netflix mode and just like, oh, you know what, skip intro, because it's always going to be the same thing. But
Mm,
being aware of what your audience needs as they are watching the show is like just another kind of like added attention that I really love about like pachinko. Like at no point in time do I feel like, yeah, it's just there because we should have opening sequences because they are meant to be there and all of that. um
mm.
yeah, so like powerful stuff, pachinko, right? I did remember, I did go and read the novel after the last time round you waxed lyrical about it. I can't remember if we
Yep.
did it on genre or not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and being able to kind of like compare and kind of like contrast the whole thing. I don't think you need to read the novel in order to be able to enjoy this TV series.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if anything, like whether or not you start with this or you start with the novel, right, like your appreciation of what is a very well told story in
Mm.
either medium is enhanced by just being introduced to it altogether.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep, yep, definitely. Okay, two last questions before we move on
Yeah.
to another HBO show. Okay, first one, let me pose it to you. Do you feel that the Solomon? This one is like the criticism portion, lah, but
Yep.
very. This is very nitpicky stuff, lah. We obviously love the show to highlight it, lah.
Yes.
But do you feel that the Solomon portions were weaker than the Sunja portions, and that dragged the show down a bit? And
uh
number two, what do you think about the earthquake episode, which we haven't talked about yet?
right. Okay, so the Solomon portions, while I understand its place as a device, didn't
Mm-hmm.
offer enough, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel there were things that could have been explored that thematically would have made sense. For example, his possible rivalry slash love interest with oh no, what's her name?
Her Japanese colleague,
Yeah, the
lah,
Japanese
the girl,
colleague,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Slash love
Slash
interest,
love
yeah.
interest, because like I felt there was so much there. Like it's well acted enough, and there is enough kind of like mystery to their dialogue that would suggest there's plenty there to uncover that we never kind of like unpack. And then
Yep.
in addition to that, I feel like within Solomon's era as well, not being able to have more about Hannah's story also seem to make
Mm,
the modern quote unquote sequences feel less full, right? But at the same
mm.
time, I understand like in a runtime like this, and I'm not really sure what Apple TV's um uh what their their
Formatting.
formatting is like, right, when they spec these things, when they spec the shows.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there are some limitations there, but there was
Mm-hmm.
just so much because I mean at the end of the day it's a genealogical problem because Sunja is there from the beginning, right? So every generation involves her. Every kind of
Yep.
like era involves her, and because of that,
Yep.
like it feels like it's so much heavily weighted in her perspective, or rather with
Mm.
her story that intertwines with everybody else's, that I'm not sure if we
Mm-hmm.
could necessarily say that we can do without like Solomon's story.
It's a neat idea. I like the back and forth, the kind of poetic juxtaposition and all
Yeah.
of that. But the book, like all close to 1,000 pages of it, is soon just POV. And Solomon, to be honest, really doesn't play a big part in the book at all.
Yeah.
And they had to beef it up because they had this idea to flash back and forth, right?
Yeah.
So they had to make stuff up for Solomon.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff also wasn't enough.
Yes.
And the stuff that they did bring up could have been explored more. But once I heard that this wasn't a mini series and they're setting up a season two, then I was like,
Yeah.
okay, they're saving some stuff lah. That's cool. We'll probably find out more about Hana and his relationship later on in season
Yeah.
two, and all of that lah.
Yeah.
And what about the earthquake episode? I thought that was the standout of the season.
Yes, I wasn't expecting it. I feel like the earthquake episode was kind of sudden, or at least that
Yep.
was my feeling at the point in time where it was inserted. Right, like
Mm.
it happens like um, shortly after Hansu has a small interaction with Noah. Right, his unbeknownst to the boy, his father, the
Mm.
father, kind of a father son interaction on the street, right? And then he goes in kind of that sequence.
Yep.
Fascinating, fascinating. I didn't expect a backstory like that, and obviously because it was created for the show itself, it
Mm-hmm.
added so much in a very short period of time to understand his motivations, right? And
Yep.
he's no longer just like, oh, this like mysterious man in a suit with like a dark history, kind of
Mm-hmm.
nonsense, and turns out to be an asshole, which you kind of thought about it anyway. It makes
Yeah.
more sense, right? And adding that makes it so much more compelling to in understanding why Sunja made the choices that she made. While she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily privy to his history, as far as we can tell, from what is
Yep.
shown in the show itself, right? Like I do feel like every character's backstory plays out in eventually, right? In their character, in the choices they make, in the way that they say things. And for them to
Mm-hmm.
have created something entirely new and in pretty
Yep.
much one episode kind of explain why he makes decisions much earlier in the series itself,
Mm-hmm.
was kind of brilliant, you know. The look and feel of it felt era appropriate, right?
Mm.
The devastation was, uh, I mean, it wasn't shown in detail, right? It wasn't like amazing kind of CGI or anything like that, but it was just enough to show the human suffering and the chaos of the
Mm.
moment for to underpin the emotional beats of those sequences, right? And I think that was like extremely important in for us to understand and to add meat to that particular character. And I wish that
Mm.
the same kind of treatment could have been given to some of the other side characters, particularly in like
Mm.
Solomon's era, right? But
Yep.
again, it could be a time thing, and also, of course, we could see all of that in season two, which I hope we do, right? Like seeing how they did that
Mm.
for Hansu, who is really kind of paper thin in the novel itself, um, gives me hope that like we're going to get a lot more good stuff as we're going along. It could very well just be, nitpicking on a season one issue. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was. It was my understanding that this was a mini series up until season two was announced after the finale. So
Mm.
a bit of my disappointment went away when I realized that they were saving stuff. So
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
cool, cool,
Do
cool.
you
I get that.
feel like, given the amount of original stuff that they put in, do you feel like season two will have enough legs, still drawing from the novel itself while adding on in the kind of more modern era?
Yeah, they still have 60s and 70s to
That
cover.
is true. Yeah.
And I think Solomon's story will be progressing linearly, so we might see a progression from the 80s to a made up 90s in the show's fictional timeline. So
Nice.
they could do that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Looking forward to that for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, so catch Pachinko on Apple TV Plus and go to any local bookstore or the library to read Pachinko if you want Lee Min Ho.
Hmm.
If you want to check out my interview with the author of Pachinko, I have one actually from a few years back in 2017, I believe, when the author came to Singapore for a talk, and I managed to grab a few minutes to talk to them. So yeah, check that out if you want to hear her thoughts about and her fears. Like basically, here's a real side story that is nothing to do with the show at all.
Yeah.
But I was told specifically by her publicist, the author's publicist, that I was not to bring up the Apple TV show at all.
Oh, really?
yeah, specifically say like, because of the NDA, she can't say, what
Right.
it's gonna be about, what it's gonna
Right.
be different and everything, blah blah blah. So, I carefully added that question at the end of the interview. Like we got 15 minutes for the interview, right?
Yeah.
So like at minute 14, if I ask the question, if the publicist wants to cut me off,
Yeah.
then oh well, I already got most of the interview, so it's no loss, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had to try lah. So I asked about the Apple TV show. What do you think? And she was so scared of it. She was so against some of the changes that were proposed to her.
Yeah.
She has since lightened up on that lah,
Yeah.
and upon seeing the show.
Mhm.
But I can but man, she was so anti the show. And I think like she might have gotten in trouble for like bad mouthing Apple TV and like stuff and the writers' room and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In my interview, so I'm sorry about that, but I had to ask. Like, it's my job.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
would love, I mean, I hope that now, honestly, from what I'm understanding from my general searches, Pachinko is still extremely underwatched, right? And
Mm,
because like people aren't familiar with the original novel, or the fact that
yeah,
Apple TV just doesn't have as many subscribers as any other streaming platform at the moment.
yep.
But overall, it has been an overwhelming great response from viewers and critics alike. I'm curious
Mm,
to know what her feelings are now,
yep.
and kind of like moving forward into season 2 as well. Um,
Yes,
but yeah, I'll
definitely.
keep a lookout and see, if she says anything. So
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, go to Popwire if you want to check out my interview with Min Jin Lee. She also has a new book out, by the way. So go check that
oh,
out as well.
nice.
Yeah. I was actually interviewing her in promotion for this book that just came out, but it took her 3 years to write it. But she tells me that she takes about 6 to 7 years to write a book because she spends 3 to 4 years just in on research.
Yeah, I. Mm.
Her latest book is actually about tuition centers, and you can guess why she came to Singapore. Uh,
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's move on to HBO to talk about Minx.
Mm.
There's this really famous saying, right? It's hard to define the difference between arts and pornography,
Yep.
but you know it when you see it. This show cleverly skirts all that because this is art about pornography. Minx is a HBO Max show that follows ambitious 1970s feminist Joyce as she reluctantly teams up with a sleazy but sweet porn publisher to launch the first erotic magazine
Mhm.
for the female gaze. The publisher, Doug, who's played by Jake Johnson, sees their mag as a way to capture a yet untapped market, while Joyce is determined to launch a truly progressive magazine full of incendiary op-eds. Together, the mismatched pair and their whole cadre of fun office mates deliver a joyful new addition to the workplace sitcom genre.
Mhm.
Minx is a show that is very breezy, easy to watch, and powered by pleasure, and it delivers it in spades. It's created by Alan Rappaport, and it kind of opens with Joyce's dreams. Joyce is like this second gen feminist and has always wanted to launch a revolutionary magazine called The Matriarchy Awakens to bring feminism to women everywhere. However, the only interested publisher she can find is a hustling porn guy called Doug, and he's not interested
Yeah.
in her pious political rag, but an offhanded dig she makes about a magazine full of naked men marketed to women
Yeah.
catches his eye, right? And
Yeah.
Doug convinces Joyce to enter his world in the underbelly of the valley where our prim and proper heroine, almost comically so, I mean, this is a sitcom,
Yeah.
must overcome her own inhibitions and re examine her preconceptions. So her creation is a magazine called Minx, the title of the show, which will sneak in her politics in between pages of uh, man meat. There's a lot of penis in the show. So if you're bothered by that, you probably shouldn't watch the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's not just the two of them, although they are the driving force. Minx also has a great, rich ensemble cast of talent who
Mhm.
bring the laughs and drama and everything. What do you think about Minx?
I appreciate equal opportunity nudity in
Yeah,
my
yeah,
TV
yeah.
shows, right? Like props to them for like just a copious amount of it, sure, but from both sides.
Mm,
I think the premise of it was kind of like really caught me. I remember when you were first talking about this over day or something like that.
Yep.
I was just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I'll kind of check it out. But yeah, I feel like it's a welcome addition to like, a whole bunch of like amazing kind of workplace comedies. Uh,
Mm.
it being turned on its head with its premise, right, of this kind of like uh chock full of dicks feminist magazine.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is enough to drive most of the story, but on top of that, you put a whole bunch of like misfit, lovable characters, right? Who
Mm.
are not perfect and completely and deeply flawed in their own way, as they just kind of like try to achieve their goals and dreams in a very haphazard almost way. Like no one really knows what they're doing at given moment in time, and they kind of like stumble in and out of like these hijinks and success at the same time.
Yep.
Like having that kind of stew altogether makes Minx extremely enjoyable and easy to watch and easy to be invested in kind of like the characters as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will say
Mm.
overall there were portions, I think, especially when we kind of go into like second act conflict, that felt a little underdeveloped, right? And could have like perhaps needed a little bit more kind of like screen time for some of the relationships and how they get resolved.
Mm.
But outside of that, I have very very kind of few complaints. Like it was easy to kind of put on, kind of like breeze through. Very a lot of like laugh out loud moments, a lot of like tongue in cheek and very meta kind of like references to just porn industry in general and the era in which they were situated at, right?
Yep.
And yeah, just all around really kind of fun in a very like it doesn't it feels more wholesome than the premise tells you, you know.
Mm.
Uh
It's actually a very very sweet show.
yeah, and I really, really kind of like enjoyed that part, like amidst what a lot of people would dismiss as kind of like a sleazy cash grab. Not the show necessarily, but what the characters are doing, right, within the story
Mm.
itself, right, turns out to be honestly very sweet, very wholesome, and very kind of like emotionally rewarding. Um,
Yeah.
i- as a kind of underdog story, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, and those were like the most enjoyable parts for me for Minx, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, Ophelia Lovibond, who plays Joyce, right, with this kind of wide-eyed, kind of bordering on real-world naivety,
Yep,
but not exactly lacking in charm. Like there is something endearing about her, despite her being a very outspoken in her second wave
yep.
feminist beliefs. To the point where she's willing to literally lecture a cat caller at a construction site about his
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah.
But the show actually like doesn't eternally position her in the role of being right in her
Oh yeah.
approach to smashing the patriarchy. In fact, it is through working with Doug, someone who only seems like a misogynist at first blush,
Yeah.
as well as the rest of his kind of porn publishing company, the Bottom Dollar Crew. It's through working with them that Joyce finds some of her biggest preconceived notions about what constitutes feminism, most directly and rightfully challenged.
Yes.
It is Johnson's character who challenges her, and there is no coincidence that she becomes a more winning character the moment or the more that she starts to surrender her tight grip of ownership around the concept of what the Minx
Yeah.
is, which in turn allows the magazine to be the best version of it can possibly be.
Yeah.
And in contrast to that, the character of Doug is almost tailor made for Johnson,
Yeah.
who is just this guy in every show or film that you've ever seen him in.
Yeah, I know. It's just
Uh,
an extension of Nick, right, from New Girl. It's basically like what would happen if Nick was put in a Doug Renetti suit, more or less.
yes, yes, exactly. The two of them drive the drama and the comedy, but the rest of the bottom dollar are really good as well. I mean, got a shout out to Tina and the rest of them,
Yeah.
and Ming's kind of veers closer to resembling a workplace comedy or series solely by the strength of its ensemble cast,
Mm.
because the show drops the button-up Joyce in a world inhabited by free thinking and unashamed personalities, and the results are the comedy gold. That's the comedy gold to be mimed. Characters like Bambi, photographer Richie, and all that have their own artistic insight to staging and art direction and things like that.
Yeah.
They offer perspectives that are the naive uh, main character might not have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but there isn't really too much to talk about the show, because it actually, at its core, is actually just a really fun, breezy workplace sitcom,
Mm-hmm.
which we haven't gotten in a while, and that's why I liked it.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on Minx before we move on?
Oh man. Yeah, just there are a lot of like great kind of, I don't know, like hidden lessons, but surprising kind of lessons to go along the way.
Mm.
My particular favorite is Joyce and her relationship with Shane is
Yep.
one of the most like funny uh portions of that, with like a very very kind of powerful lesson at the end of that for both Joyce and for the audience that's watching, right? About power
Mm-hmm.
dynamics and kind of like the relationship of that for a self-professed feminist. um as you mentioned earlier, right, that's like to me one of the my favorite kind of like plays on the entire thing. Has Minx been greenlit for a second season?
Yes, it has. Yeah, on HBO Max.
Excellent. Okay, I'll be looking forward to that for sure.
Yep, yep. Finally, we'll be moving back to HBO. Surprising. Well, actually, it's unsurprising. Like HBO is HBO. Three of our four picks are HBO shows.
Yes.
But we already praised Apple TV for being the best streaming service. But I mean, channel in any internet or regular TV or cable or whatever, HBO is still king, like, in my opinion, of creating top-notch shows. Their track record is so impeccable.
Yep.
The last season of Game of Thrones notwithstanding, lah, to be but I mean, Game of Thrones did start out as a great show, so
Yeah.
they really QC the shit. And a new HBO show in partnership with A24 is Irma Vep. So I gotta give a little background on Irma Vep.
Hmm.
A little background might help.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Irma Vep exists already as a 1996 film
Yes.
and as a new limited series, which are both written and directed by French director Olivier Assayas.
Hmm.
In the Meta movie in 1996, Assayas portrayed a small, struggling film crew led by an aging and mentally unstable director, Rene Vidal,
Hmm.
as the crew and Vidal attempted to remake a 1915 French serial called Les Vampires. The source was a 10-part silent noir about a ring of master criminals who called themselves the vampires,
Hmm.
one of whom, one of the ringleaders, was the alluring and deadly Irma Vep. I don't need to point out the anagram to you, it's quite obvious. And she is
The show
an
makes it
evil
obvious. Yes.
Yes, yeah, and she is an evil diva who slinks around in a black cat suit, stealing jewels or abetting in kidnapping and murder. So in the earlier work, in the
Hmm.
1996 film, I'm sorry, Assayas casted Hong Kong action star Maggie Cheung
Yeah.
in a fictionalized version of herself. And she is kind of sort of a fish out of water in Paris. She is bemused and unsettled by the neurotic French types buzzing around her,
Hmm.
and these characters sort of lightly satirized post new wave artists,
Yeah.
including the bipolar director, the costume designer who becomes infatuated with the charismatic actress. And though it was brainy and beautifully shot, it was kind of a cinephile's dream diary,
Hmm.
attracted to yet critical of film culture, globalization, and the eroticized icon of a supervillain like Irma Vep. So it's sort of like this deconstruction of the French film industry in a very very meta way,
Hmm.
with Maggie Cheung as your proxy, as an outsider proxy into a different culture.
Yep.
26 years later, in a new HBO miniseries, Assayas has created a different, younger Renee, now played by Vincent McCain, who casts an American star, Mira Harburg, Alicia Vikander,
Hmm.
as Irma Vep in a remake of his remake. So in this fictional universe, the actual Irma Vep, the 1996 film, does exist. And Maggie Cheung was in it. And Maggie Cheung was also the director's wife.
Yes.
Layers of meta upon meta.
Mm.
So this new actress, Alicia Vikander, Mira Harburg, Mira has just finished this MCU like mega flick called Doomsday, and she's swatting away offers by her agent Zelda, played by Carrie Brownstein, by the way.
Hmm. Hmm.
So she's kind of pitching her to play the female Silver Surfer and what stuff like that, and
Yeah.
she's kind of been becoming disillusioned lah, by starring in blockbusters, and she wants to make, you know, art, I guess. And she wants meaning in her career. As for Rene, his depression and rage issues are barely kept in check by Mets, which in turn complicates the production company's attempts to insure him. And the aforementioned Jade appears to Rene in the middle of the night, the Maggie Chung character, to gently chastise him for recycling their shared memories in this remake of a remake.
Yep.
And yes, as I mentioned, in real life, Asayas was really married to Chung.
Yep.
So the Jade Renee scene is a barely veiled confession from artist to his muse. You
Mm,
know, we start cataloging other instances of art imitating life, imitating art.
yeah.
But we don't have that much time today, so I'm just gonna say that happens a lot.
Yeah.
What do you think about this remake of a remake about remaking a move of a remake? Yeah,
Oh my god. Like this is as cinema as it gets, right? Like the
yeah,
inner
yeah.
workings of cinema displayed as cinema, displayed
Mm,
as cinema, captured for cinema. And it's kind of insane to wrap your head around how many layers there are, but you don't have to, right? Because
yep.
I think like the characters in and of themselves are extremely well rounded out for you to be following and invested in them without necessarily like taking every kind of like meta layer into account. Uh
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating like the what they chose to keep within this fictional kind of universe, right? The references to, of course, the original kind of serial, and of course, the original movie with Maggie Cheung in it. I'm a huge fan of Maggie Cheung, and I was so excited to watch that.
Mm,
And just like a very different take, I feel like in the beginning of the series, right? Given that I had just rewatched the original 1996 Irma Vep just to brush up a little, I think, oh really, Alicia Vikander as an American actress who would kind of like take the place of Maggie Cheung. Like I love Alicia
mm,
Vikander, but she's no Maggie Cheung, right?
mm.
I understood that decision like further down the line. In fact, it's even addressed and explained by Renee himself, in one
Yeah.
of the wonderful kind of like dream sequence, I guess, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with Jade Lee, who played Maggie Chung, who played
Yeah.
herself. Um,
Yeah.
and I love like these little things that just like make my brain tick as I'm enjoying the general drama and politics and difficulties of being on set on and in production.
Mm-hmm.
With all of that added on top with the personal drama that is still unfolding as the series goes along. In particular, I think like Mira's kind of like very tumultuous personal life and how that
Mm,
locates her with her need to be on the set of Irma Vep as a kind of vindication of her talent, perhaps,
mm-hmm.
or even like a change in perspective for her career.
Yep.
Like all of those things add up to what is an extremely enjoyable and meaty
Mm-hmm.
venture or look into the process of making a piece of film, right? Or TV show. I don't know. They argue about it in the series as well. So that's up to the audience to kind of decide what it actually becomes in the end. I love
Mm,
the tone changes when we go from what is seen on screen. That means like whatever sequences is supposed to be within the series that they're shooting itself, and switching back and forth to what is the real world and what is imagined is very seamless and very beautiful and very believable. And I really
mm,
enjoy times when that happens, right? And there's not much hand holding, all in all,
mm.
and Irma Vep, the series, is a very different animal from what we got in 1996, for sure.
Yeah.
For Asayas to come in with this additional kind of twist to everything that he's already done as homage and as building upon his own film as well
Mm,
is fascinating in so many ways. I can't wait to see how this like develops in its totality to see what I'm not sure if the what the point of it is or what like what the message of it is necessarily, but at this point in time I'm all along for the ride.
yeah, yeah. The message can be something as simple as art imitating life, imitating art, lah, which is what these kind of meta stories of filmmakers looking for catharsis
Hmm.
are eventually all about.
Yeah.
And if you think, these thick layers of celluloid history and biography and self-reference might lead to kind of a shaky product. Think again, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually stuffed with some very colorful characters
Oh
who are
yeah.
speaking with wistful, believable dialogue. There's attractive locations. There's graceful camera work. Irma Vep really floats. It's a really easy to watch behind the scenes comedy with enough heartbreak and humor to keep it grounded. It is, I mean, true, it is very French. There are some serious, passionate conversations about art versus commerce or truth versus fiction,
Yeah.
all over wine or espressos, of course,
Yeah.
because it's French, And then there are discussions about the differences between sexualization or eroticism. There's a lot of great chemistry between many of the actors here. And the series is also ridiculously bingeable and addictive. It looks lavish and lovely. When Mira dons a catsuit, she moves and acts like she's possessed, which turns out is again part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Also expanded for this mini series are various subplots. The actors who want meteor roles, the actors who want more provocative roles, producers who have more money-minded motives than art in play,
Yeah.
Hollywood agents who are pushing you to take superhero films. It's all very funny, but somehow all very believable.
Yeah.
And all the romantic conflicts connecting the on-camera stars and the supporting assistants and crew members. It's a bit like a show business version of Downton Abbey with the upstairs and downstairs folks, constantly shifting
Yeah.
power plays.
Yeah.
It's very playful, it's very sexy, and also sometimes, a lot of times, flat out funny.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have like one particular instance. This is running gag, right?
Yeah.
That really made me love the show. It is, I think it's something in particular that a lot of TV critics, not just myself, I think just in general,
Yeah.
TV critics have complained about this a lot over the last 10 years. It's the fucking highfalutin indie art house film director coming into the TV world and
Yeah.
insisting that they're making a 10-part film.
Yeah.
And just like TV, television is a taboo word to them, and has been, and it will continue will be, and that's why the productions, or that's why the TV shows suck, because they don't know the episodic format.
Yeah.
They treat it like one elongated film, and the fact that Renee keeps insisting that this is a 10-part film, not it's not a TV series. It's rather a very very long film told in 10 parts.
Yeah.
And even his psychiatrist is like, "That's a show."
Yeah.
Okay,
And it's released on
that
TV.
really got me.
Yeah, it was super.
Yeah, yeah.
It was super funny. I think the post like dinner party drinks in the garden where they're arguing whether or not it's a film or a TV series or its content, right? I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my god, like it is so. I feel like I've had those conversations before, but
Mm.
the way in which they present it and the way in which the banter just kind of goes on in sort of in good humor, I guess. Like I get it. Like that recurring gag is very effective when they bring it about, for sure.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of very inside baseball kind of talk,
Yeah,
about cinema and about global box office blockbusters and intimacy coordinators, which is a fairly new thing, post Weinstein and all of that. But it's all presented with enough wit and genuine affection that I guess outsiders to cinema or TV industry wouldn't feel so lost.
hmm
Oliver Assayas himself was a French film critic before he became a filmmaker, and it's no surprise that his best films are criticisms of the French film industry slash TV industry.
yeah,
It obviously he loves what he's doing, but he obviously wants to point out some of the flaws and foibles of the industry as well. And
yeah.
with this new Irma Vep series, I think he's getting to do that as a 10-part movie. But irony is, right. Every episode actually does feel episodic.
Yeah,
Yeah, I get that he is like sort of self mocking lah.
yes.
That type of thing. So really, really great. I would recommend Irma Vep on HBO. You can catch it on HBO Go in Singapore as well.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we move on to our top 10 shows of the year?
Yes, there is no real need to actually watch the 1996 movie except for additional context. I think the show
Right.
does give you enough within the series itself to kind of give you an idea of where that
Yeah.
stands within this fictional universe. But yeah,
Mm.
but if you love kind of like strange, film in film French art house stuff, with Maggie Cheung. Like, there's no
Mm-hmm.
harm kind of checking it out. It's a very short
Yep.
film to begin with.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, I think of all of that, like really props to Alicia Vikander for like bringing an incredible, believable, nuanced performance Mira Harbour. I think I mean, I loved her from a lot of the things that she's done, maybe save for the Tomb
Mm-hmm.
Raider movies. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like Mira's performance is a particular highlight for me because it is
Mm.
played with a lot of care and with a lot of nuance, and it's extremely believable.
Definitely. And yeah, that wraps it up for our top four highlights for best new shows of the year.
Yeah.
This is a mid-year rundown, so shows that came after June were cut off, but
Yes.
we will be covering the second half of the year at the end of the year, of course, what
Hmm.
we hold. We'll be covering the best films for the second half of the year and the best TV as well.
Yeah.
And I've already picked out a few for each category, so I'm already eager to jump into that one. But for now, let's delve into the top five series overall
Mm.
that we have for the mid-year of 2022.
Yeah.
So how this works is Isa will pick five shows,
Hmm.
and since I've seen more, I'm gonna let him pick his five shows and
Yeah.
not do any crossover picks.
Yep.
But at the end, I will tell you what my real top five is, lah. But
Absolutely.
we won't cross over, so we will have 10 different picks, which is why it's our top 10 shows. But five for Isa, five for
Hmm.
me. And I guess in the parlance of American sports, what are your draft picks? What is your number
Ooh,
five?
okay. So for my number five, I've got Hex. I was specifically talking about season two.
Yep, yep,
For that, I think the tone shakeup between season one and
mm,
season two, amazing. Love it.
yep,
Right? Like the additional uh personal drama between our two leads in season two itself, which we've already kind of like talked about at length, right?
mm,
Has been the highlight of the show. Right. Also extremely bold, but extremely kind of natural to flow from everything that's happened in season one into this. I don't know if it's blessed or cursed necessarily partnership between them
yep,
has been, really, really interesting and so much more tension, so much more drama, but at the same time still being incredibly laugh out loud in parts. It makes it for
mm.
extremely kind of potent combination that continues to be compelling in season two. So that rounds out my picks for top. Not rounds out, but starts off my picks for my top five within our top 10.
Yeah. Isa's top five. Again, sorry to tell you, it's also on HBO. HBO is just fucking killing it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, seeing Deborah and Ava's dynamic on the road offers a much more deliciously volatile environment for their various neuroses and
Hmm.
vices to erupt. In season one, Deborah was always, excuse me, was always more or less in safe, comfortable territory,
Yep.
right? And out on the road, she is vulnerable. She's testing new material. She's bombing a lot.
Oh yeah.
Eva has her own vulnerabilities to contend with. She's grieving the loss of her father.
Hmm.
Not to mention, she's still one misstep away from being completely broke.
Yep.
She's gotten on Deborah's bad side because of a terrible email that she sent at the end of season one.
Yeah.
And I think what makes season two crackle more is because both women are rawer than we've ever seen them before,
Yeah.
and that emotionally dangerous state makes the comedy all the more deserved and dangerous and satisfying. And especially after you laid all the groundwork in season one
Exactly.
for them to become actual friends,
Yeah.
this setback in the relationship feels even more heartbreaking. So yeah, they definitely earned that. So good number five. My number five, sorry again to say, is also on HBO.
Yes.
Season three of My Brilliant Friend continues into the 1970s. Of course, if you're already familiar with the show, or if you're unfamiliar, let me break it down. It is an adaptation of Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels, which follows the lives of two impoverished young girls into adulthood, into old age
Hmm.
across the years. Season three is set in the 1970s, and it finds Elena, our one of our two main characters, Elena. As a successful author. She's become a successful author. Meanwhile, her friend Leela is now working in a meat factory as a blue collar worker.
Mm.
This is such a beautiful, sublime show, and it continues to be a real transportive experience. You really feel like you're in Naples. You really feel like you were on in the 50s in season one, in the 60s in season two,
Yeah.
in the 70s in season three. The series, like Ferrante's books, offer a vivid, close treatment of female friendship, the relationship between Leela and Lenu. Lenu is short for Elena.
Hmm.
Remains constant in its, I guess, inconsistency. It's the ups and downs of friendship. There's jealousy, there's curiosity alongside affection, and this season is the interactions between Lenu and her really take it up a notch. I have to commend both actresses who are both 19, by the way, who played 30-ish year old women
Oh yeah.
here.
Hmm.
And they were very, very believable in that. Obviously they were cast when they were 14 to play, the kids, and then they grew up along the show. But this is the first season where they had to play so vastly different. It's such a huge age gap, upwise.
Hmm.
The final season next year will actually recast them. I think it's the wise choice because I don't think they could. I mean, they're good actresses, but I don't think they can pull off people in their 40s and 50s. So I'm sad to see these two actresses go, but if you want one final hurrah with them, is really great.
Yeah.
My Brilliant Friend has, for a long time, been the most underrated show and my favorite show on HBO. I don't know whether I love it so much because it's underrated, because no one else knows about it, but I
Hmm.
love championing this show.
Yeah.
This is a television show that weaves a spell unlike anything I've ever seen in a long time. It demands concentration but rewards it generously. It's such a good character-driven show.
Hmm.
It's very similar to Pachinko. If you've seen Pachinko, you appreciate this,
Yeah.
in terms of
Hmm.
the multi-generational saga-ness of it all. And that is my number five. What is your number four?
My number four is Atlanta, season three.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you've heard Hadi and Hits and myself like rave about Atlanta multiple
Mm,
occasions, right? And it has gone again from kind of like strength to strength. I think like Atlanta's ability to always keep things fresh and mix things up has been its strongest selling point.
mm,
With the introduction from season two onwards, and season three is no different. Being able to kind of like catch up with our favorite characters and have episodes that have entirely nothing to do with them, but just adds to this fantastical urban magical realism of a world
yep,
that they have
yep.
created has been so fun and so bizarre and so absurd, but at the same time extremely compelling to kind of like sit down and watch everything at one go. Yeah.
Mm.
This is uh this is the last season, yes. Or is there
No.
no?
Season 4 and 5 have been greenlit as well.
Yeah. So where we are right now, and just like kind of the shift in focus from the usual gang to kind of like the side characters or even kind of new characters that have been introduced in late season two or in late season three. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, like the focus on Vanessa in the run up to the last couple of episodes has been refreshing. Absolutely,
Mm.
like being able to kind of like fill out those corners of this world and the characters that haven't got as much kind of like screen time or kind of much backstory, and seeing just kind of Earn and Paperboy just kind of like stumble their way through this whole music thing is a joy to watch and incredibly funny while being like some of the most uh, solid and inventive kind of storytelling that we're getting in this kind of series so far. Yeah.
Yes, yes, definitely. Great pick for number four. I know a lot of people did not enjoy the anthologyness of season three, especially because of the 4 year gap between seasons two
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
three. They wanted to spend more time with Ern and Paperboy and Lakeith Stanfield and Vanessa and all that, But I do appreciate the big swings that Donald Glover always takes.
Yeah.
He is so ambitious in what he wants to say, and also it's not as if the anthology stories are not great short stories on their own. They're fantastic. They could be watched in a vacuum and
Hmm.
still blow you away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really, really loved Atlanta season three as well. For my number four, I'm picking a show that I've already talked about on genre equality. It's called
Ew.
Undone.
Yeah.
Undone by Raphael Bob Waxberg, who obviously did BoJack Horseman,
Hmm.
continues his incredible hot streak. This is another 10 out of 10
Yep.
for one of the best animation storytellers working today. Season 2 continues to approach the concept of trauma as an inherited trait with care and precision. On a technical level, the show is an absolute marvel. Its rotoscoping is unlike any other rotoscope film or TV show you've ever seen
Hmm.
before. And like Fleabag season one, just when it felt like Undone could not top its first season, the second finds it firing on all cylinders, perhaps even improving upon the greatness of season one.
Yeah.
It is a tragic and poignant story of how to live with past guilt, pains, and scars from generation to generation.
Mhm.
It is a hallucinogenic family dramedy that's made to be seen and experienced, and I enjoyed every little bit of it. And that's my number four. What is your number three?
Oh, my number three, again, we've raved and ranted about Better Call Saul. But
Mm,
we are halfway through the final season,
yep,
season six so far. And I think, honestly, for me, past season four, it was already on my mind that Better Call Saul has surpassed Breaking Bad in terms of its
yep,
quality as a story and as a franchise. Right.
yep,
I think like now that we're in the final season, having seen the first half of it and in wrapping up all of that, I don't know, magic, mess, chaos, plans, schemes, all of that kind of like rolled into one and like just kind of waiting to be resolved. Better
mm,
Call Saul has certainly kind of hit its stride. Like something that I in season one dismissed as just kind of like a spin off has become perhaps even more compelling than the franchise that spinned it off for
yep,
entirely different reasons, right? It's an entirely different kind of show while set in the same world with familiar characters. These characters have gone about it in their own way, and with their own story, and it has been consistently good and has delivered every season so far. And season six, well, the first half of it at least, has delivered even more of that. So that is my number three pick.
yeah. And Better Call Saul might even jump to number one because we haven't seen a full season yet. They
Exactly.
are on a mid-season break at the moment.
Yeah.
And Better Call Saul is firing on all cylinders. It is consistently one of the best shows. It
Hmm.
will always be in the top five for whatever year it's there.
Yep.
But I think overall, Better Call Saul might actually be better.
Yes.
Sorry to keep using the word better than any of the other shows that we've talked about, just because of sheer consistency.
Yep. Absolutely.
In its character work, in Rhea Sion continuing to be like the MVP for everything.
Hmm.
Um, you know, um, Jimmy is great. Glad to see Bob Odenkirk has recovered from his heart attack to finish the show.
Hmm.
Um, Everything about the story, from even a side character that we were not supposed to like in the beginning, like Howard Hamlin,
Yeah.
Howard Hamlin and Nacho,
Yeah.
especially were the kind of two biggest plot points of this the first half of the final season.
Hmm.
And who would have expected that in season one?
Yeah.
That these two side characters that are barely related to Jimmy or Mike or Kim
Yeah.
would become such fan favorites. So kudos to Nacho and Howard. I almost said something else that would have spoiled their fates, but I'm not going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
What yeah, but yeah, Better Call Saul, I definitely agree with you. What number are we on right now?
Uh, you're number three. You're number three.
I'm on my number three. Okay,
Yes.
so that was your number three. My number three is a show called Severance.
Mm.
If you want to listen to 10 out of 10 praise for Severance, I already talked about it on Genre Equality 53. But if you don't know, here's a small little synopsis. It is on Apple TV Plus. It's a thriller where Adam Scott plays Mark,
Mm.
a man who literally has no life outside of work. The show takes place in a world where corporate employees can volunteer for what is called a severance procedure that completely separates their memories of their time in the office from their memories of everything else.
Hmm.
So, office memories, personal memories, separated in your brain. So, essentially, there are two different marks. One is the innie who exists in and around the office, the sub basement cubicle where he does some sort of inscrutable data entry. And then there's the outie who has no clue what his body does down there for 8 hours a day.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, as created by Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller, the show literalizes the struggle for work life balance in a way that feels equal parts Charlie Kaufman esque sci fi whimsy, paranoid 70s thriller, and late stage capitalism satire. And it's one of the most uh, thrilling, exciting shows that you ever see. Its finale is hands down one of the best finales I've ever seen. You will be breathless for a good 45 minutes
Yep.
in that final episode. It has one of the most like infuriating cliffhangers that you also ever see. So yeah, do check out Severance season one. Honestly, my top three picks here right here, like depending on the day, you ask me on a different day, I will pick any one of these three as my number one. So
Mm. Mm.
yeah, that was my number three, Severance. You haven't caught Severance yet, right?
I have not caught Severance yet. I have not caught any of your top three, I believe, yet. Just because,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So, for yeah, moving on to my top two, we've already talked about this on on Behold specifically. I can't remember
Yeah.
which specific episode, but we'll probably link that somewhere below.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so my second pick is Better Things, who has just wrapped up
Yeah.
all of their seasons, I believe. Yes, yeah, we're completely
Mm-hmm.
done with that. Yeah, Better Things continues to kind of like work on its fantastic kind of like cast of characters and like the individual stories that form their lives as these well, I guess at this point these four women,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
at this point these four women, as they go about like dealing with their family drama and conflicts, and they're kind of like their own personal growth and just kind of the obstacles in their way from trying to realize who they are as people, and they're redefining their relationships with their mother in particular, or with the greater world around them, or even like kind of the shared bonds of sisterhood, and all the strange things that happens in their house. uh
Mm,
it has been quite a journey. Better Things has been one of the most difficult franchises to accurately qualify as to why it's so good, or at least I have struggled with that when recommending Better Things to somebody else, right? Because it's not
mm,
exactly a family drama. It's not exactly, it doesn't fit neatly into any sort of categorization, but
mm-hmm.
it's entirely kind of naturalistic episodic formula that they've adopted over the last four seasons has been so enjoyable and so compelling. Just
Yep.
like from season one, I've been so invested, and now that we're four seasons in and everything kind of wrapped it up, one of the most consistent series that we've had the pleasure of watching and reviewing on our show. Yeah, and
Mm,
I think like just from the sheer strength of that, being able to deliver episode after episode, season after season, with great storytelling and great performances, and just a very sweet, very natural, very believable story about a family just trying to be just that, to be a family. It
yep.
has been one of the most enjoyable things that I have seen
Yep.
every year that it has come out, and in particular this year as it wraps up.
Mm. Definitely have to agree with this pick, man. It's right up there for me as well. That ineffable quality that you're talking about,
Mm.
the inability to summarize it,
Yeah,
is what makes this better than every other American TV show, even the excellent ones.
yeah,
It makes them seem formulaic and timid
yeah,
in comparison. There's very loosely formed, plotless, character driven vignettes, and it's filled with believably awkward and volatile and humane moments among Pamela Adlon's, Sam Fox is the character, and her
yeah,
daughters, as well as the friends and colleagues and exes. It's a show about mothers and daughters essentially. Like that's why I put it as it's
yeah.
about the sisterhood of all women, particularly the mothers and daughters of one kind or another.
Hmm.
And it has this variance of the observations that all mothers are single mothers, and it keeps recurring. And Better Things is able to find beauty and a meaning, and beauty and meaning in parts of life that so many screenwriting manuals insist that they're inherently dull or should be avoided in favor of action or conflict or jeopardy.
Yeah.
That's the sneaky power of the series. It lies in Atlon's determination to do what she's been told not to do and to point the cameras at the parts of the world that commercial television
Hmm.
rarely notices.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Great pick for your number two, man. My number two is a show that has really elevated itself this season. It is the third season of HBO's Barry, created by and starring Bill Hader.
Mm.
It's Barry is just on another level this season. Like every single episode, I keep thinking this is the best directed episode I've ever seen.
Yep.
Bill Hader has really upped his chops in terms of uh, comedy, especially in terms of action this
Hmm.
year. Just the way he frames things is so unique. He points the cameras in ways that I never have seen any other filmmaker do. He
Mm.
finds such unique way to convey metaphor and convey literal things. one particular chase scene in episode 5 is probably the most unique chase scene you've ever seen in the history of filmed content. Barry also remains very, very funny, but this year, more than any other year, season 3 of Barry, it becomes some of the darkest shit you've ever seen. This
Mm.
is season 5 Breaking Bad level
Oof.
of darkness,
Yeah.
that Barry delves into. It is very unapologetic and is very unfiltered in its determination to make you, the audience, realize who after 3 years you were so sympathetic to Barry.
Mhm.
They want you to understand that Barry is not a good person in the same way that season 5 basically, all those people who kept rooting for Walter White, and
Yeah.
they're like, look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
That is what Barry keeps doing here,
Okay.
while being absolutely hilarious. Like, you can be hating on Barry but still be laughing in the situation that he finds himself in.
Mhm.
That's the genius of Barry, and Barry Kiss keeps every season is better than the previous season. That's the best way I can put it. And very few shows have this type of like incline. Yeah, incredible. I highly recommend the third season of Barry, especially episode 5, guys. One of the best episodes of the year. That was my number 2 pick. What is your number 1 pick, Isa?
Yes, my number one pick. We've just talked about it,
Yep.
and usually I would be kind of be against like trying to overlap with stuff that we're discussing in the actual episode itself. And
Yep.
I don't know because of its recency bias or what, but Pachinko is my number one pick so far. I think like it's
Mm,
been it's been a special experience like watching through the entire thing. I think given enough time, it would rank about the same as Better Things, right? But and Better Things has the advantage of having 4 amazing seasons behind it, but
mm,
Pachinko has felt great and fresh, right? Despite our little nitpicks about it so far, it is certainly the one that I've personally enjoyed the most this year. And
yep.
again, recency bias, but easily one of my favorite for sure.
Yeah.
I like you embedding that Better Call Saul will probably be at the top at the end of the year, but we'll see how it goes.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, Better Call Saul still has time to fuck up, right? Although it won't, lah. I mean,
yeah.
look at the track record. But that's the thing that I've talked about several times. Like, I'm reluctant to put Better Call Saul above Breaking Bad because I haven't seen how Better Call Saul ends.
Yes.
Like, I don't know. So
Yeah.
for now, Breaking Bad, just by virtue of delivering everything from beginning to end almost perfectly, is still at the top, lah. But Better
Yeah.
Call Saul can top it
Oh
if
yeah.
it just doesn't fumble at the finish line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we already talked about Pachinko. Loved it as well. My number 1 for the year is weirdly also my number 1 of 2021. This is a show that straddles. Half the show was in December of 2021.
Yeah.
The other half of the show was in January of 2022. This is HBO again. Sorry, HBO Max's Station 11.
Mm-hmm.
And its timing is unfortunate or spectacular, depending on how you look at it. The 10-part adaptation of Emily St. John Mandel's acclaimed novel is about the aftermath of a flu pandemic that wipes out 90% of the world.
Mm.
And it arrives at a time when, hey, we were still fretting about COVID.
Yeah.
Um, but the majority of the limited series, as adapted by the Leftovers' Patrick Summerfield and directed by Atlanta and Barry's Hiro Murai, actually takes place 20 years in the future, post-pandemic, when we follow a character called Christine, played by Mackenzie Davis, as she tours the American Midwest with a company of actors and musicians called the Traveling Symphony, who performs Shakespeare plays for survivors eager to experience any bit of culture from the world they once knew. And the exploration of what art can and cannot heal,
Mm-hmm.
as well as what pieces of society could and should potentially survive such an apocalypse, feels even more relevant and powerful now
Mm-hmm.
than even when the book was published in 2014. It has this marvelous blend of despair and whimsy. The show is non-linear like Pachinko, but its reliance on flashbacks and other non-linear storytelling is, I think, in my opinion, by far the smartest and most effective use of that device TV has seen in quite a while.
Yeah.
Station 11 features some of the year's most tear-inducing moments, but also a healthy mix of quirky comedy and riveting oddness. And despite the seemingly bleak subject matter and the action and the suspense and Christine trying to protect her friends from cults and stuff like that, Station 11 is surprisingly goofy and comedic and light on its feet.
Yeah.
There are moments that are just so special. There is a random impromptu rap cover of A Tribe Called Quest breaking out to liven a tense moment. There are magical sequences of pregnant ladies raving to TLC's Creep in a department store. There is even a moving rendition of Hamlet in the series finale that heals old wounds in the final episode. This is the rare post-apocalyptic dystopia that emphasizes hope, not cynicism. It argues that the world is, for the most part, a better place
Mhm.
once the old systems are gone and people can begin anew. It also argues that art and stories are what can help us understand each other and communicate things too painful to say out loud.
Yeah.
Art and stories are what gets us through the dark times and the tragedies, and that's kind of been that's what we're trying to emphasize here
Mhm.
also,
Mhm.
in our podcast. Art and stories are the things that can get you through things. That's what Station 11 is about. That's why it's my number one for 2 straight years, uh in 2021
Yeah.
and 2022. We'll see, like, not the end of the year yet, but
Yes.
I still find it hard to beat Station 11, man. Station 11 is such a perfect mini series,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the. I mean, admittedly, I don't know how it would have gone in season 2 or 3 or 1, but it's just like a perfect short little story that was told perfectly from beginning to end.
Mhm.
That's why it's my number one for the year. Okay, that being said, though, right?
Yes.
For the mid year, my actual number one is actually Isa's number two. My
Yeah.
actual number one is Better Things, right?
Mhm.
And I find it hard to disagree with any of his top fives. Any of his top five, if you ask me on a random day,
Yeah.
they'll probably make my top five as well. So our top 10 are pretty much interchangeable in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm.
I think they're all 10 out of 10 shows that, depending on your mood, the rankings will change. But just so happens today, this is our mood and these are our rankings lah.
Yeah.
But all 10 shows, including the four that we've already talked about before, are highly recommended. Go check them out. A lot of FX, a lot of HBO, and a lot of Apple TV Plus. Yeah, I mean, so much to watch. If you haven't caught up, spend your summer watching some of these shows.
Yeah.
And there are already shows from June and July that I already want to talk about, but hey, we spent too much time on this. I'll save that for another podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other like honorable mentions or shout outs before
Oh
we
man.
cap this episode off?
Okay, just a thought, right? We're
Yep.
going on to like almost 5 years of doing this, and I think
Mm.
this year is the most stacked we have ever seen TV. The number of
Mm.
10 upon 10s, 9 upon 10s, 8.5 out of 10s that we have watched and reviewed and talked about and gone in depth with this year alone is, in my memory, more than any other year that we've done this. Am I right to
Mm-hmm.
say that? So, I mean,
Yep.
we're kind of in a heyday right now of like TV storytelling, and sort of
Mm.
like, I don't know if we'll call it renaissance necessarily, but certainly another golden age. And it's been such a ride. It's kind of hard.
Mm.
I don't know how you're gonna deal with like picking all your top 50 at the end of the year, to be very honest.
Yeah, I mean, this year, weirdly enough, the reason we have gotten so many great shows compacted into such a short period is because of COVID.
Mm-hmm,
A
mm-hmm,
lot of these
mm-hmm.
10 out of 10 seasons that we're talking about should have been released in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
Um, and they all just came together right here, right now, in the first 6 months of 2022. They're just being popped out there, due to production delays and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's in addition to the shows that debuted during the COVID era. Shows like Hex,
Yeah.
shows like Vet. They are also coming back now. So we have more additions to this great filmography or TVography or whatever you want to talk about. This golden era is as stacked as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
When I can't find a spot for a show like Hacks on my top 10, that shows you how great. Only Murders in a Building, a show that I fucking really really love. I can't find a spot for it in my top 10.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows how good the year is, and we'll have more to talk to you about. I'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about the Paddington franchise with
Mm-hmm.
Hardy, and we'll be back at the end of the month to talk about genre stuff.
Yep.
Thor: Love and Thunder we'll be watching
Oh
soon.
yeah.
Miss Marvel is 2 more episodes to the finale. I think The Boys has had a spectacular season. Look, The Boys could easily fit in my top 10. I just can't find a place for it. In any other year, The Boys would have been a top 3 show. Like
Mm-hmm.
this particular season of The Boys.
Mm-hmm.
So too The Orville, which again is having a killer season. Again, it points back to like how stacked the year is when stuff like Orville and The Boys and Miss Marvel can't find a place in my top 10.
Yeah.
Good. Good lord, but we'll talk about them anyway. We'll praise them with genre equality 56. Anything in particular that you're looking forward to talking about?
Oh man, I'm super excited to go catch Thor: Love and Thunder, which is just coming out in Singapore for sure.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, I really want to talk about Miss Marvel, and like this is probably going to be like one of the first few. Well, we did have it in Hawkeye as well, but the new
Mm,
generations that are kind of like they're grooming for taking place. A lot of the Avengers and Marvel stars are getting older and running out the end of their contract. They're introducing the new generation as they've done with the comics in recent times. I'm
yep.
super interested in like how they are doing it and where they're gonna go.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'll be talking about David Cronenberg's new film, Crimes of the Future.
Mhm.
I'll be talking about the final season of Wellington Paranormal. I'll be talking about The Witch 2, the sequel to The Witch, not the Robert Eggers one, but the Korean superhero one from 2018.
Yeah.
The new season of Solar Opposites. I even saw Minions, The Rise of Gru, so I'll let you know how that goes.
Did you wear a suit to the
Oh,
opening?
no, I did not. It was a very prim and proper critics opening where everybody groaned and everything. And unfortunately, I'm assigning Isa the live action Netflix Resident Evil show, which I don't know, lah, I don't want to prejudge lah,
Yeah, we'll
if
see.
we but live action Resident Evils have not gone great, shall
No,
we say?
no, no. I will struggle through as much of it as I can, and I will give you a report about it. So either because you want to or you don't have to. So we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see.
yeah, yeah. And till next time, this has been Hitzer.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.